Today we're going to make some reaction today over the state of Venezuela. And we're going to actually go back in time a little bit and talk about some history, because I think it's very important to understand how some of this began and why there might be so much unrest in that area and why the people of Venezuela are crying out for help from the rest of the world. So I want you to just stay with me and look at what their leaders have done to them. And I'm just going to start off with this little piece, and then we're going to actually come back to it in the very end. But you can see right here, this is Hugo Chavez. This is him condemning Israel. And we're going to actually go back to this later in the video.
Todos estos meses, todo el tiempo de marcha por mi familia, por la comida, por el pueblo.
Siempre voy a estar en las calles luchando por la libertad de mis hijos. Y bueno.
La violencia del gobierno y la violencia del AMPA. Todo eso son razones para tú salir a protestar, a manifestar, a defender tus derechos y aspirar a una mejor Venezuela.
I want you all to take a moment and see the contrast of what's going on. This is a video from 6 years ago. So even the uprising that's happening right now is super important to understand. Why they are protesting, why they are doing what they're doing, is because they're being led by a dictator. They are fighting against all the things that people here in the United States are fighting for. There's a lot of people fighting for the things that they already have. So pay close attention. Now, myself, I'm fighting for freedom. Okay, I'm fighting for freedom. So this is why, and as we go through this, I pray that God reveals to you in this moment, if you are a person that believes socialism is a good thing, I hope this video, this reactions video that I'm making, I hope that it triggers something in you to snap you out of the veil or the smoke that you only see. I hope the scales fall off your eyes in Jesus' name. And I hope you see what they are going through is leading up to what the United States is moving in the direction towards. And you'll also see that when Hispanics come from Latin America, they come from Venezuela, they come from Cuba, they come from Colombia. When they come from there, they are more likely to be Republicans than they are Democrats, because the Democrats push the socialist agenda. So take that into consideration as we're listening to this. I want you to be open-minded. I want you to tolerate this video. This is not going to be a super long video. We're going to watch one for about 7.5 minutes, and then we're going to watch another one that's only like 8 minutes or so. So as a whole, we're probably going to talk through this video. It's going to be about 30 minutes. Okay? So just take some history in for just a moment. If you don't know anything about why Venezuela is going through what they're going through, I want you to just take a moment and watch what we're watching. Okay? All right. So let's keep going.
Venezuela was once the richest country in Latin America. It has the largest known oil reserves in the world, and its democratic government was once praised worldwide. But today, Venezuela's democratic institutions and its economy are in shambles. The country has the highest inflation rate in the world, making food and medicine inaccessible to most Venezuelans. Over the last 4 years, its GDP has fallen 35%, which is a sharper drop than the one seen during the Great Depression in the US. And the country's murder rate has surpassed that of the most dangerous cities in the world. These conditions have sparked months of protests against the president, Nicolas Maduro, and it's easy to see why. The country has become measurably worse since his election in 2013. A poll showed that about 80% of Venezuelans want Maduro removed from office. But instead, the opposite has happened. Maduro has consolidated his power, bringing the country closer to authoritarian rule. Maduro's political ambition became evident in December 2015. 2 years after he became president, a coalition of opposition parties called the Democratic Unity Roundtable, or MUD, won a 2/3 majority in the National Assembly, putting Maduro's rule at risk. In response, Maduro quickly forced out several Supreme Court justices and filled the positions with cronies loyal to him. In March 2016, the court ruled to strip the opposition-led National Assembly of its powers, a move that sparked massive protests across the country. The ruling was reversed a few days later, but the damage was done. Protests continued to grow and have left about 100.
Taking away power from the people, the checks and balances that are created in government. That's what we created. That's why the United States is so free, is because we create checks and balances to keep someone like this from rising in power and having a universal dictator. One person can make the ruling on one thing or many things.
100 dead and thousands injured so far. Despite the violence and public outcry, Maduro held a vote in July to elect a new governing body called the National Constituent Assembly, which would have the power to rewrite Venezuela's constitution and essentially replace the National Assembly and leave virtually no opposition to Maduro's rule.
You see that? No opposition. He created it so there's no opposition to the executive branch, meaning he could go and do whatever he wanted to, because he took the opposition, had the other rule of government to keep him from controlling everything. So he created another rule of government that just pretty much took it away and rewrote the Constitution. Do not ever wish to rewrite the Constitution of the United States. If you wish that, then you're actually creating the things that you think are good. It is bad. It is bad. It keeps one person from ruling the entire country. We have to find a common ground, everyone. We have to find a common ground. We are given God-given, unalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what we are given here in the United States. And this man, Maduro, he's the leader right now of Venezuela. He's the one that just said, I'm the winner. And they're saying that he lost 60-30. He lost 60-30. So there's 10% that didn't vote, or 10% of error. So let's keep watching.
¿Por qué está saliendo a votar hoy?
Bueno, por el bienestar del país.
¿Qué está buscando en esta nueva Asamblea Nacional Constituyente?
Bueno, una paz para todo.
With Maduro's recent vote, Venezuelans didn't have a say in whether the assembly should exist. They only had the option to elect its members. But when Maduro's predecessor, Hugo Chavez, proposed a constitutional rewrite in 1999, he first called for a referendum to propose the election of the assembly. After most Venezuelans voted yes, they then elected a new National Constituent Assembly. See, unlike Maduro, Chavez was a charismatic and beloved leader. In the 90s, he burst onto television sets across the country. He blamed government corruption and Venezuela's elite for the economic inequality. His populist
For the economic inequality. That's what Hugo Chavez fought for that. Do you hear that?
This message resonated with the country's poor.
He was charismatic. He killed tens of thousands.
Who eventually helped bring him to power. The key moment in his presidency came in 2000. Country's poor, who eventually he blamed government corruption and Venezuela's elite for the economic inequality. His populist message resonated with the country's poor, who eventually helped bring him to power. The key moment in his presidency came in 2004 when oil prices surged. Venezuela's petroleum-dependent economy started booming, and Chavez went on to spend billions from the profits on social welfare programs for the poor. He subsidized food, improved the educational system, built an enviable healthcare system, and reduced poverty by more than half. These programs certainly helped the poor, but they served a purpose for Chavez as well. In order to be re-elected, he needed to keep these millions of poor Venezuelans happy, so he rigged the economy to do just that. He didn't scale back Venezuela's dependence on oil, and his unrestrained spending led to a growing deficit, which meant all of these programs would be impossible to sustain if oil prices fell. After Chavez's death, when Maduro took office as his handpicked successor, that's exactly what happened. Oil prices plummeted in 2014, and Maduro failed to adjust. Hyperinflation has made medicines and food that were once subsidized unaffordable for Venezuelans poor, who now make up about 82% of the population.
The poor make up 82% of the population. After he gave millions upon millions for food subsidies, health care, all those things, created hyperinflation. What are we going through? This is from 6 years ago. This is from 6 years ago. So I'm not just making this up to fulfill this video. This is what you're seeing from another country. Socialist values, trying to play the poor card, trying to give certain subsidies, government programs. It didn't do anything. It caused hyperinflation. And now 82% of their population is in poverty.
Like Chavez, Maduro has also rigged the economy to keep himself in power, but this time it's not benefiting the poor. He's exploited a complex currency system put in place by Chavez. Maduro set the official exchange rate at 10 bolívares per US dollar, but only his friends and allies have access to this rate. In reality, the Venezuelan currency has become basically worthless. Most Venezuelans get their dollars on the black market, where the rate is about 12,000 bolívares per dollar. The military, which got complete control of the food supply from Maduro in 2016, is reportedly profiting off this currency crisis. They import food at Maduro's special currency rate and sell it on the black market for a massive profit. So for military generals and political allies of Maduro, the crisis has offered a lucrative opportunity which has helped Maduro stay in power. But he can't rely on that support alone. Which brings us back to Maduro's recent power grab. The opposition boycotted the vote, but Maduro held the vote for a new constitutional assembly anyway, and won a majority.
Protests on the streets of Venezuela turning deadly after President Nicolas Maduro declares victory.
The violence on Sunday very real.
The bomb went off near some motorcycle police, wounding several.
Election day clashes between protesters and police claiming at least 10 more lives.
At least one candidate has been murdered, shot to death.
La elección de la Asamblea Nacional Constituyente es un fraude abierto, el mundo lo ve, lo ha visto, está claro, todos están claros de lo que sucedió. Ahora, lo que hay que seguir es seguir buscando la libertad, porque nosotros vivimos en libertad y sabemos lo que es eso. Para allá vamos a ir.
Lo que sucedió ayer fue el más grande fraude que se haya cometido en cualquier elección nacional. Era un fraude cantado, ya se sabía que iba a ser una elección con poca asistencia, pero con una gran participación forjada por el gobierno.
Maduro's government is trying to create the illusion of public support. The government claimed about 8 million people, or 40% of the country, voted, but experts put that number much lower, at just 3 million people. The international community, including Peru, Canada, Spain, Mexico, and Argentina, condemned the election. The US imposed financial sanctions on Maduro and members of his government. But Maduro's assembly, filled with loyalists, convened anyway, and it swiftly removed Attorney General Luis Ortega, leader of the opposition. Armed groups reportedly arrested several other opposition leaders too. Whether the group will rewrite the constitution or postpone the next presidential election remains to be seen. For now, Maduro has unprecedented power over a country that continues to spiral out of control.
Esto está cada día peor, mi querido. Si este hombre no se va, aquí Venezuela, bueno, ya. Una guerra aquí. Aquí lo que hay es guerra, una guerra.
I have one more we're going to watch.
Venezuela has always had a relationship with oil. The whole country is almost floating on an ocean of petroleum. It was known that even in times before the Spanish acquisition, that the indigenous population of the country used the oil tars that seep from the ground to waterproof their canoes or keep fires going throughout the night. Venezuela has always had a taste for the stuff, But it wasn't until the 1970s that it became front of mind in the eyes of the world, when then President Carlos Andrés Pérez effectively nationalised all oil production in the region. Now, we have seen before that nationalising oil production is not necessarily a bad thing. In the case of Norway, it meant that a lot of oil revenue was returned to the country itself, which is great. The Venezuelan process, though, was a lot more bureaucratic, and despite having huge oil reserves, the country's output was severely limited. It also wasn't a huge help that the country was a member of OPEC, a group of oil-rich states that basically had a pact to not...
A bunch of crooks. OPEC has a bunch of crooks. You all talk about monopolies. This is the greatest monopoly in the history of humankind.
Not flood the market with oil to keep prices high. And you might ask, well, isn't that a monopoly? Isn't that illegal? And, well, yes, it did act in a monopolistic and anti-competitive ways, but these were sovereign states. They are, in many senses, above the law. Oil production in Venezuela was at this time almost completely handled by the PDVSA, which stands for, I'm going to butcher this, Petróleos de Venezuela, which was a state-owned oil company which had a monopoly on oil production in the country. This was very similar to Norway's Statoil Corporation, now called Equinor. It was a business in structure and nature, but its only investor was the government, and all of the profit was for the government. Where Venezuela's government enterprise differed, though, was the incredible levels of corruption. Oil company officials would frequently misuse government money that was intended to go towards investment into oil production. What this meant was that during the 1970s, almost no new oil fields were brought online, which for an oil company that is literally given free access to the largest oil fields in the world is pretty terrible. This started to turn around, though, when this man, Hugo Chavez, took office in 1999. He sought to turn around the inefficiencies in the state's oil company. He started setting quotas for the company to meet and came down hard on corruption and bureaucracy built into the lumbering, inefficient semi-government agency. This all came to a head in 2002, when the employees of the company went on strike, effectively complaining that this state-owned oil company was actually being expected to produce oil. Crazy, I know. Chavez saw to this by basically kicking the workers out and installing new workers into the company that were loyal to him and his plans for the oil revenues that would flow. The oil production of the company boomed, and the Venezuelan government was able to ride the high of the early 2000s oil prices to massively increase the government's income. The government of Chavez was also very economically left-leaning, and so a lot of this revenue was distributed to the people of the country through government welfare programs. This is so far actually not too bad. It actually sounds pretty great. It even sounds very similar to what happened in Norway, a country that has been discussed and mostly praised many times over on this channel before. But this is where it all went wrong. While most oil-rich countries recognize that oil doesn't last forever, Venezuela decided to go on a spending spree. Taxes were lowered and government spending was massively increased. This government spending, for the most part, didn't actually go towards productive infrastructure or even something like a sovereign wealth fund that could have provided the country with a long-term foundation of wealth. No. Instead, this was spent on government handouts that did work to improve the quality of life for the average Venezuelan, but it did so in an extremely unsustainable manner. Similar to someone winning the lottery and then buying a truckload of caviar to feed the local homeless shelter. I mean, sure, it kind of does the trick and you would be extremely popular, but canned food would probably last longer and be an overall better investment for the greater good. The vast oil production also led to a very serious economic phenomenon that would go on to plague the nation.
This is all important things to learn about the economy. This is Economics Explained. This is the name of this YouTube channel. So they're not, biased in any way. They're just talking about economics and what some of these terms mean. So I think it's super important as we go into this next season of the United States that we need to learn from mistakes of other countries.
Dutch disease was a term coined in 1977 following the decline of the manufacturing centre of the Netherlands after a discovery of a large natural gas field in the country. It is a term used to describe the impacts that poorly handled oil and resource wealth can have on an economy, and Dutch disease hit Venezuela hard. When a country like Venezuela starts exporting oil, its currency shoots up in value because people need to purchase Venezuelan country to purchase Venezuelan oil. This may seem like a good thing, but an artificially stronger currency causes issues elsewhere in the economy. Suddenly, it becomes very cheap for Venezuelans to import foreign cars and foods and cigarettes and the like because their dollar has shot up in value. This means that local industries start to suffer because it becomes cheaper to import something than it is to buy locally, especially given their position in Latin America.
Does this sound similar by anybody? I think someone even in the comments in one of my previous videos or another video that I commented on, someone commented and replied to me and said, "Don't be an idiot. It's going to be way cheaper to get stuff from other countries." Okay, well, you keep thinking that way and go ahead and see what's going to happen.
America, surrounded by countries with very low costs of living. This really hurts local industries that have to compete with cheaper foreign competitors. It gets even worse though, because suddenly Venezuela can't export anything either. Because their currency has increased in value, suddenly their goods are artificially more expensive and less competitive on a global market. On top of this, local industries are starved of workers and investments as labour and capital is redirected towards the far more profitable oil industry. A successful natural resource boom can effectively smother all other industries to death with its own success, and this trap is so common that it has its own name. Dutch disease was particularly bad in Venezuela because the government didn't really do anything to diversify the economy. A lot of oil-rich countries try to reinvent themselves. The United Arab Emirates wants to turn itself into a centre for business and tourism. Norway wants to turn itself into the world's largest hedge fund. And even countries like Iran make sure that they support local industries. Venezuela basically said, yeah, sustainable industry is great, but who cares? We're rich. Let's make it rain like there is no tomorrow. By 2008, all export industries apart from oil had collapsed. There would have been massive unemployment issues, but the government just threw cash at people to make the issues go away. Dutch disease and reckless government spending also caused other major issues in the economy.
Here we go.
Crowding out is another major issue that can be caused by an overzealous government spending. In this case, the government of Venezuela was throwing money around the economy pretty aimlessly. This, of course, made them wildly popular amongst their citizens, but it also caused systematic issues in the nation itself. When government-run enterprises and workers get all the money that they ever need, it makes it incredibly hard for private enterprises to compete. Likewise, the insane amount of borrowing the Venezuelan government was doing at the time made it very hard for local businesses and individuals to get access to credit, because the government was kind of just swallowing up all of the money that was available there. This also stifled a lot of free enterprise in Venezuela. Why would I start a business if the government will just open a competing business, run it at a loss, and drive me out of work? This happened a lot, as the government kind of went crazy with its government-owned enterprises moving into utilities, roadways, health, internet and telecommunications, but also more obscure industries like tourism and finance, buying up private banks and making them state-run, which was financially crippling to purchase and then so poorly run that none of these businesses ever made a profit. By this time, they even started going into debt. Yes, debt, to fund their excessive government spending. At this point, the country was literally a lottery winner who quit their job, spent all of the money, and then remortgages the home that they bought with their winnings in order to buy more lottery tickets. But it was fine, of course. This doesn't matter. We always have more oil, and oil is a limited resource. Its price will go up forever. The declining oil price then brought the whole house of cards crashing down. By this point, the country was so heavily leveraged that any impact on their oil revenues would cause serious financial hardship on the state. When this became a reality, the poorly managed government bureaucracy did what a poorly run government bureaucracy does and tried to print its way out of trouble, causing massive inflation on the currency, which in small doses might have actually been fine, but this very quickly turned from quantitative easing into straight up hyperinflation. And the rest, as they say, is history.
I like this guy's final thoughts. We're going to listen to him.
Venezuela's story is of course very upsetting given the level of human misery it has caused in the turmoil of the nation. The ongoing protests, government crackdowns and questionable elections have caused political condemnation on the global stage. which has led to trade sanctions being placed on the nation with major trading partners like the United States, which is the last thing a crippled country needs, and it is further suffocating an already struggling economy. It is a good case study though, when it is compared to other nations or plans that have followed similar paths. We have studied the economic proposals of people like Andrew Yang on this channel before, and many channel commenters rightfully asked what his proposed government welfare would mean for the overall health of the economy, especially in relation to inflation. Beyond this, the whole story of Venezuela doesn't sound too dissimilar from the story of Norway's oil boom. How did one country end up as a poster child for economic responsibility and the other end up as a failed state? Well, the key, as always, is in the details. Norway used its oil wealth for social welfare, the same as Venezuela. It wanted to make sure that the citizens of the nation benefited from the wealth of the nation. But Norway did it in a far smarter way, investing the money into a fund that will continue to generate revenue for the nation long after the oil is gone. Venezuela just pumped oil out of the ground and kept the party going, living paycheck to paycheck and going into debt to boost its living standards. Right here, right now, with very little thought for what would happen in the future when the oil runs out or its value declines. Yang's plans are glorified government welfare, but the revenue isn't coming from the golden goose. It is coming from the inherent ability of the nation to generate wealth, not just pump it out of the ground. Any economic entity that finds itself relying on a single source of income is in a potentially precarious situation. It gets worse the bigger you get as well. For an individual, relying on just a day job is probably fine. For a household, relying on a single income is not great, but it works in many instances. For a company, only having one source of revenue is very, very reckless. And for a nation, relying purely on one form of income and doing very little to create wealth otherwise is just a recipe for disaster, like we have seen in Venezuela.
So it's important to understand what's going on in other countries. If you didn't know some of that and you learned something new today, take it into context of what's going on in the United States today. We're about to have a new president. Whether you get Kamala Harris or you get Donald Trump. Both of those people have different paths that this country is going to take us on. One has been spending like we saw in this economic failure of Venezuela, and one believes in a good business plan where we diversify what we do and how people take our goods and we sell those goods, and we actually have workers building things here that other countries buy. It is very important that we don't just take in a bunch of imports from other places and say, well, it's cheaper if we get it from China. Their economy is broken. You just heard from 6 years ago and the one before, their poverty was 82%. Is that what you want? Do you want to take on imports from everywhere else? We just don't make anything, and the government just runs us into oblivion. Stop taking government handouts. Get a job. I know it's hard to get a job right now. I don't even have a job right now. But I planned for future. I didn't live paycheck to paycheck. We planned. My wife and I planned for somewhere down the road, something bad was going to happen. But here's my final thoughts. I hope Venezolanos, I hope that they are praying to the God that created them, and Jesus wants to reveal himself. But you have to understand that in your suffering, people are praying for you. And our leaders can only do so much. But what we saw when a leader took a seat in Venezuela, he tricked them. And it's sad. But I'm going to go back and I'm going to actually show a video here. And I told you in the very beginning that this is the origin of the downfall of Venezuela. and it all had to do with a leader. And this also might answer a question too, that Hugo Chavez died from cancer. And I'll answer where that cancer was in just a second, but I want you to listen to what he said in front of the world. Okay? This was before he had cancer, okay? And then I'm also going to tell you, this is in Spanish, but it does give you some captions in English.
Terrorismo. Son ellos los que patrocinan el terrorismo. Aprovecho para condenar de nuevo, desde el fondo de mi alma y de mis vísceras, al Estado de Israel. Maldito seas, Estado de Israel. Maldito sea.
Did you see what that said? The translation says here, from the depths of my soul. The translation, if you ask someone that speaks Spanish, the translation comes to from my guts. His cancer was in his stomach. He ended up getting cancer in his stomach because he cursed Israel from his guts. It's pretty powerful. You have to pick a side, and that's why we choose Israel's side. God's eye is on Israel, whether you like it or not. So be careful who you curse. I hope you have a blessed day, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Please click subscribe if you'd like to see more. Crazy. Crazy, crazy.